It was Morning Joe on MSNBC, where I saw the most well put together argument for the exhaustion strategy for 2024. The Republicans are going to be running out of money at the way things are going right now. They are not a good investment for oligarchs, because oligarchs do require that the country exist and be stable in order to do what they do. And Trump is sucking up all the small dollar donors, which leaves no dollar donors of any size left for the rest of them. That's to the benefit of sane human beings everywhere. Here's Steve Ratner on Morning Joe breaking down exactly what's happening to all the money.
Three past the hour. As former President Donald Trump's legal troubles grow, so do his legal bills. And it comes with consequences for his political campaign. Let's bring in former Treasury official and Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner, who is at the wall with charts. And I take it, Steve, Donald Trump doesn't like to pay personally his own bills.
He doesn't like to pay personally his own bills, but
God damn. I'm sorry. We got to take a minute. Look at that setup. That's a nice studio. That's a real nice studio. Ooh. All right, lads. Let's see what you got.
He's been raising some money, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But let's start by talking about the impact of Donald Trump's indictments on his fundraising, because it's kind of interesting. So if you look over here, these are Google searches, and you can see that after the Manhattan indictment, his searches on Google shot way, way up here to it's an index number of 100, pretty much as high as it can go. Then you can see a little bit of a bump during the Jean Carroll thing. Then the documents indictment, much less of a bump in his Google searches. And then January 6th, also much less of a bump. But interestingly, his fundraising has tracked this to a considerable degree. He raised almost $4 million in one day after the Manhattan indictments, and a total of $14 million over this period. But it did trail off. He only raised $6 million after the documents indictment. And we don't know yet about the other two, but at least the initial rush of donors to him over that faded. But when you look at the...
One moment. I have a question. Will the fact that Fani Willis is a black woman, and she is seen as the sort of the head of this indictment, let's say, the leader of it, will that get a bunch of donations from terrified white folks? It genuinely might. Be warned. Be ready for that. But the question I have about the rest of that is, are these folks that were donating out of money, or rather, are they running out of money, or are they running out of interest? I don't have an answer. But we predicted here on the channel. I use the term we because I don't think I'm fairly confident I wasn't the only one that said it amongst us all here. But we predicted that people have a certain amount of money they're willing to give to a cause, and they have a certain amount of money that they have to give to anything at all, and they will run out of it. This lines up with that theory of how this operates. But it's also worth noting people have a certain amount of patience. Like, I gave you $100, politician, and you said it was to X, but you didn't do X, and now you're asking for another $100. No, you can coast off the $100 I gave you, or convince somebody else to give you $100. That is in my head. That's how the feelings end up translating to thoughts when I'm thinking about politicians. And I'm assuming, I could be wrong, but I'm assuming that's what's going on in the heads of Trump supporters.
The impact on his total fundraising. He's raised $54 million during this period, the first half of this year. $20 million of it came in the wake of those two sets of indictments. So the indictments have been a big part on the revenue side, if you will, of his finances, of his campaign.
And certainly, Steve, a flurry of emails soliciting donations have come out this week from the campaign after the Georgia indictment. But that's the money he's raised, but he's also had to spend quite a bit. And your second chart there on the Southwest wall is about the legal fees and how they're draining the campaign's coffers.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. He has actually been paying not only his legal fees, but for a bunch of his team out of his campaign finances. And it would probably be interesting for a donor to Trump to know that 50 cents of every dollar he raised in the first half of this year went to pay legal fees. So if you give money to Donald Trump, half of it, roughly, at least for the last 6 months, has been his legal defense fund, and the other half actually his campaign, so you should know what you're giving to. But you can see that over time, his legal bills have been mounting quarter by quarter, 6 to 8 to 12 to 15 million. His fundraising did drop a bit. It was higher in the second quarter of this year. We'll see how that all falls out. But then it's had a pretty big impact on his cash on hand. He went from $114 million of cash at the beginning of last year, most of this in one of his PACs, all the way down to $63 million at the moment. But this PAC of his main PAC, has literally gone down to $5 million of cash. So his cash coffers have come down a good bit as he's paid his legal bills and also, of course, some money for his campaign.
So these donors must really be.
We'll get to the second half of that in a moment. So with that chart that's up there, you actually see the sources of power and influence in Trump's life shifting pretty dramatically. But also understand that these cases have just begun. And in Georgia, there are 19 defendants. Trump's primary legal strategy, by way, I'm not even suggesting that the strategy is itself legal. It's just his primary strategy for dealing with the charges in a courtroom, let's say. Yeah, there we go. His primary courtroom strategy has been to use House attorneys, to use, for all the people that would have testified against him or could have testified against him, let's say, he buys their attorney. And that's how he gets away with so much. Not exactly a complicated magic trick. He pays for the attorney of folks that would testify against him, combining that with the threat of violence from his supporters and how unpleasant he'll make the testifier's life. That's where you get the behavior we've seen from a lot of people. But he's got, I mean, look at how fast he burned through $50+ million. You can hire a reasonable attorney for less than $1 million. I don't know why. I understand rich people play a different game, but I'm familiar with the middle class game that's played and taking people to court and what have you. And I'll tell you, I've never seen the case that was worth what Trump has paid for attorneys. So we talked about people flipping, and we talked about the weight of the cases against him, the weight of the evidence in the cases against him, and reasons people might be flipping just because they don't want to go to prison. But also understand this guy's running out of money, and right now he's picking who of those 18 other defendants he can afford to pay for. It's a bad time to be Trump, which means it's a good time to be everybody else. Let's let the gang bring it home. They did good so far.
Supportive of Donald Trump being so willing to pay his legal bills. Claire McCaskill, you have the next question.
Yeah, Steve, did you have a chance to...
Nope. I don't give a damn what Claire McCaskill has to say. So I'm going to be super immature and wrap it up there.